So today we're going to go over some terminology in pathophysiology that is imperative, and especially in my case, I plan on becoming a psychiatric nurse practitioner. So especially in the clinical phase, these are imperative terms to understand and be able to define and discuss. So the first definition is disease. What is a disease? It's an acute or chronic illness that causes some physiological dysfunction in one or more body systems. And it's important to note it doesn't have to be isolated to one region or one body function. It can affect 2, 3, 4 different body functions. The disease I chose as an example is pneumococcal, which is miner's black lung. It's buildup of scar tissue in the lungs, which makes it harder to breathe. And my father actually has this disease, and it's chronic. It's ongoing. It continues. He's had it for about 20 years now. Acute would be rapid onset. Moving on to our next definition, disease classification. Well, this is extremely important because we can classify diseases by where they occur in the body, what body function do they affect, what organs do they affect, if any, is it located, is it isolated in one organ, one region, and the prevalence. Is it more likely to happen in North America versus South America? And this is getting into epidemiology, Could this cause an epidemic in where I live, where someone else lives? Is it more likely to happen here versus there? So disease classification is crucial. An example of disease classification is, again, using black lung or pneumococcal it's a disease of the lung. It's a lung disease. That disease is isolated in his lung due to the scarring tissue, making it hard to breathe and subsequently causing exacerbation of the lung tissue to build up and make it harder for the lungs to work and function and produce or take up carbon dioxide and produce oxygen or give oxygen-rich blood to the body. Pathogenesis. And this is important to note that etiology is different than pathogenesis. Pathogenesis is how the disease process evolves. So once the onset starts, how does it evolve? Okay, it's the sequence, or we could call it the cellular tissue, that takes place from the onset till the ultimate expression of the disease. Ultimate expression of the disease would be, in our case, where we actually diagnose or see the signs and symptoms of black lung or pneumococcal. Pathogenesis would be the entire process from the onset, the beginning stages of it, to the ultimate expression of that disease. Etiology, which is different from pathogenesis but similar in some aspects, is the cause or what sets the disease in motion. Well, exposure to asbestos and silica would be the etiology behind that, and these are called etiological factors. Okay, these could be bacterial agents, chemical agents such as alcohol. Bacterial agents, obviously, it could cause infections, viral infections, the flu. An etiological factor, etiology behind black lung would obviously be exposure to asbestos or mining dust, which has asbestos and silica in it. Symptoms. It's important to note that symptoms and signs are both used together, but they're very different. Symptoms are very subjective. We really can't logically justify them because they're what someone else tells us. So it's a complaint that is noted by a person with a certain disorder. An example of this, probably the best one, is a headache or pain. We can't see or justify that, and we can't test it. We have to take that person's word for it or into account. Whereas when we get to signs, sign is a manifestation that is noted from an observer. So it is no longer subjective, it becomes objective. We can actually, for instance, change in temperature or a high temperature of 102. That's something we can test with a thermometer, that we can note. We can use diagnostic tests to confirm that it is a sign. Moving on to syndromes. Syndrome are complications of signs and symptoms. An example of this would be chronic fatigue syndrome. And moving on to diagnosis, which is excuse me. This is a very important part of the clinical phase for me. It's the designation as to the nature or the cause of the problem that we're talking about. So a diagnosis, we're using educated equipment, diagnostic tests, everything we learned before, signs and symptoms to give a diagnosis. And a diagnosis is the designation to why that illness is occurring to that person. So for instance, someone comes in with we think has the flu, we're not for sure. We test them, we do blood work, we do bacterial tests, and it comes out to be a viral illness, and their temperature is 101, they feel sick, maybe temperature's only been 2 days. We would diagnose them with this illness that we call the flu. Complications are possible adverse extensions. Okay, so if we have the flu, a complication of the flu could be extremely high fever. So if your fever gets above 102, 103, we could say complications of this. I think this is more likely to happen with more severe cases versus the flu. Obviously, the H1N1 or SARS or different types of diseases can vary in their nature, but complications can extend to lots of different things. It's like even blunt force trauma injuries or surgeries that may cause excessive bleeding. Excessive bleeding would be a complication after surgery. Then we get into prognosis, which is, we don't want to confuse this with diagnosis. Prognosis is a judgment or opinion on what we think the outcome is going to be. So if I diagnose you with the flu, my prognosis may be that because I know the flu is a viral infection and that your body will probably fight it off in 3 to 5 days, I may say that in 5 to 7 days your fever will start to go down and you will start to feel better. So my prognosis would be that judgment or forecasting how they're going to feel in 5 to 7 days. And even a worst case scenario, someone could have cancer. My prognosis may be, well, you have 6 months to live. So that would be a judgment or an opinion based on what I think is happening. And then finally, diagnostic media. How are we differentiating this disease that we've come to find? And we use this by different types of media. We could use blood test media, bacteria, or agar plates to determine what type of bacterial agent is causing a certain infection. Even getting into CT scans, X-ray scans, we're using this diagnostic media or this diagnostic testing to understand what's going on with the body, what could be causing this illness. So an example of diagnostic media for black lung pneumococcal would be lung X-rays. We could see polyps or scarring tissue on the lungs that was building up, that was making this person have this physiological dysfunction dysfunction inside their body.